Hi guys, and welcome to History 240 again. As you guys can see, I'm still unpacking, but at least you guys can hear me today. Still sick, but hopefully we can get through this and kind of get back on track to where we need to be. I know next week is a makeup week, so we should have enough time to cover all the material before your test, which should be approximately the 17th. I'm going to move the date back so that way you guys can take that test over the weekend. So don't worry too bad about that. While the test is not open book, I know that you guys probably aren't going to pay attention to that. So I'm just kind of going to leave that open for you. You guys only get to take it one time, and it'll be 25 questions worth 2 points apiece. Be multiple choice, or excuse me, 4 points apiece, and it'll be multiple choice. There won't be an essay portion with it, but you guys should have all of the grading caught up and up to date after this Sunday. That's my goal, is to have everything caught up and up to date so that I don't have to worry about it by Sunday. And I will message you guys to let you know if for some reason something changes. So that's all the housekeeping stuff that I've got to do tonight. So we're going to cover the rest of the PowerPoint that we didn't finish last week, and that's going to be all that we do this week. Next week we'll cover into the Mexican-American War, and we'll stop there before your first test. And that's pretty much it. So let's get started. Let me get in here, get to my PowerPoints. Okay, so when we left off the other day, we had not quite gotten to the War of 1812, which is where we're going to start today. So just to give you guys some brief context for the War of 1812, it's largely considered the second war for independence. It's a war that we fought with Great Britain, and the reason why most people consider it to be a second war for independence is not because the British have tried to take control of the U.S. again or anything like that, but because they have not moved out of territories that they were supposed to when the Revolutionary War ended. There's a great deal of Native American involvement again. And there are issues with impressment, which we'll get to here in just a second. And you know, the hallmark of this is that really it's another battle with Great Britain. So you know, another highlight of it would be impressment. Now, impressment is where you take and you have a military group, and they say, okay, we think that you are actually British. You sound like us. You look like us. We're going to take you, and you're going to be put into our military service. And we're going to steal you off of this boat, kidnap you, and make you go into our military service. And so this is happening from about 1803 to 1811. And the reason why they're doing this is because France and England are in a war from about 1803 to 1814. And it doesn't really end. That war does not end until 1815, when Napoleon is ousted and sent to St. Helena. So what these British ships are doing is they're coming along and they're kind of patrolling the Atlantic. And they're saying to anyone who's in the area, okay, if you're thought to be a British citizen and you're hiding out on these American ships, we're going to take you and we're going to force you into military service and naval service under Great Britain. And that's, again, impressment. So another highlight, the Battle of Tippecanoe, the Chesapeake versus the Leopard. But we'll get kind of to that here in just a second. Jefferson's embargo of the British, and James Madison becoming president in 1812. James Madison is actually he was given a really hard time during his term as president. But he actually did a fairly good job, and he was one of those politicians that really kind of stuck to his political values throughout his time in office, and even in his campaigning. There were a couple party switches about this time, and one thing about James Madison is that despite all of that, he continues to follow the same ideals throughout his career as a politician. So let's move on to the stuff that kind of involves Kentucky just a little bit. We're going to go to the Battle of Tippecanoe and talk about the Prophet for a minute. Now, I'm sure that pretty much everybody in the class has heard at one point or another about Tecumseh. Back close to where I grew up close to Ashland. And so we weren't too awfully far away from Chillicothe, which is where they had the Tecumseh Outdoor Theater. And if you haven't seen it, it's wonderful. They do a really, really good job. Anyway, so, I grew up listening to stories about Tecumseh and how Tecumseh was born under this meteor crossing the sky, and so it was a sign of him being great, or something along those lines. I don't remember exactly at this point what the story was, but Tecumseh is a highly popular figure even in today's culture, more so than pretty much any Native American in U.S. history. I mean, you really just have Tecumseh and Sitting Bull, and no one knows any other Native Americans. So the person we want to look at today is actually Tecumseh's brother. Now, his brother is this stunning chap here in blue on your screen, and who is part of this PowerPoint. And he is a really just unattractive mess of a man, and you can tell that in this painting of him. But at the same time, he's like that in real life too. So Tenskwatawa means open door, which is his name. And he was born with a different name that I am not going to attempt to pronounce because it is beyond my ability at this point. He was born in about 1775, and his name roughly translates as the rattle. And as Tenskwatawa is growing up, he's got just a whole lot just not going in his favor. So it gets to the point that when he's about 4 years old, his mother abandoned him in the wilderness and left him to die, because he was just such a poor specimen of a human being. And before you guys kind of, go on off the deep end with this, this isn't something that's new to history, is to have your children exposed. And that's what the exposure means, that you leave your children out in the elements to die. And I know that sounds horrible by today's standards, but the thing is that we're not talking about today's standards. And we're not talking about the kind of society that we live in. In even today, there are Aboriginal peoples, mainly in Australia, that will still practice this kind of abandonment culture. And the reason why is that if you have no form of birth control, no form of population control, and you have to feed these kids, the idea is to let them die quickly, exposed to the elements, as opposed to letting them starve to death because you can't feed them. And you kind of have to weigh your entire family versus this one child. And so you may be able to feed your entire family except this one child. And so people within this culture of scarcity have to choose between what's more important to them. And in Tenskwatawa's case, it was probably likely that Tenskwatawa was going to die anyway, either because his family wasn't able to feed him, or because of his physical disabilities, because he was a sickly kid. We don't know. What we do know, however, is that he's kind of a runty kid anyway. He's not a particularly healthy specimen for human beings, but against all odds, he survives being exposed and makes it back into the community. But he doesn't grow up happily. He doesn't grow up within this kind of ideal fit for what makes the ideal man, especially when you compare him to his brother Tecumseh, who is kind of the ideal guy for this Native American culture. So he turns to alcohol. As a child, he is attempting to play around with some friends, and he literally shoots his eye out with an arrow. Like a Christmas Story, you'll shoot your eye out. He shot his own right eye out with a bow and arrow. Just not a particularly bright guy by our standards. But like I said, he turns to alcohol. And then after he is in that kind of rut for a little while, he tries to move away from that, and he attempts to learn medicine. But he's not successful even a little, because he's regarded as the village drunk. No one will come to him for their medical needs. And so he turns to more alcohol. And then one day he's lighting his pipe in the fire while he's drunk. And he falls face first into the fire, and he goes into a coma. And while he's in this coma, he has these kinds of delusions about this deity who he calls the Master of Life, and this happens in 1805. So he's not quite 30 years old at this point. And so the Master of Life tells him in these visions, you have to abandon all white ways. Everything that has to do with white man, you have to get rid of it. And if you do, you can build a nation of Native Americans. And with them, you can drive the white man back across the ocean and away from you. So he makes specific points of alcohol, gunpowder, iron cookware, glass beads, guns, things like that. And like I said, they can return to the status that they had prior to the white man coming. And there'll be no whites anywhere on North America. And you'll kind of see a reemergence of this kind of idea of abandoning white ways and really refinding one's own culture. And pushing out the whites while doing it. You'll see this a couple times throughout history, especially as we go through and we talk about Wovoka. I'm not sure if we'll get to Wovoka in this class or not, but keep that name in mind, because he kind of has these same kind of delusional dreams. But Tenskwatawa and his brother Tecumseh form up this Native American coalition, and they're actually fairly successful about bringing together groups of Native Americans in order to fight the British and to fight the Americans who are there and who are kind of taking over that land. Now, at this point, the British are not as involved as the Native American, or excuse me, as the Americans in kind of this stealing of Native American territory. They're there, but they're not really taking over that land. So it's really just the Americans who are really taking advantage of the situation and the weakness of Native Americans and pushing them out. So that's part of the reason why they side so thoroughly with the British in the upcoming war, in the War of 1812. So let's go on to the Battle of Tippecanoe. So with Tippecanoe, there have been issues within these border areas and these Northwest Territory areas that we talked about last week. There have been issues for a really long time in these areas. Now, Tecumseh and his brother moved to what is in present-day Indiana. And you can see on the map here a good kind of picture of where the forts are, where some of the attacks are, those kinds of things. And they're near the Tippecanoe River. And by this time, the brothers have linked their objectives of creating a Native American coalition and creating a religious movement. So by fall of 1811, Tecumseh leaves, and he goes into Tennessee. And his objective is to gain more followers from Tennessee. And at this point, within the city of, or the village of Prophetstown, I shouldn't really call it a city, but because of the amount of people that are there, you could almost call it a city. But so many Native Americans have come together in this one place called Prophetstown that William Henry Harrison is asked to come in and root them out. So what will happen is that he will stop just outside Prophetstown, and then he will attack in 1811. He'll attack in November of 1811, and according to Tenskwatawa, the Master of Life will help protect them, will help them succeed. So bullets won't harm them. So as they go into the battle, they're under the impression that there's nothing that's going to hurt them. So they go in, tomahawks blazing, and attempt to attack William Henry Harrison. And the attack starts before daybreak, approximately 2 hours before daybreak. And the American troops number at about 1,000 or so. And the casualties are very, very one-sided. So you have about 62 who are killed and 126 who are wounded on the Native American side. And no more than 40 altogether are hurt or killed on William Henry Harrison's side. So this Native American Confederacy is driven off, and Prophetstown is burned. And when Tecumseh comes back, he's like, Tenskwatawa, what happened? What did you do? And the whole Native American alliance that Tecumseh had been working to create falls apart, and it never regains strength again. And this is really the point where the Native American coalition starts looking to the British as allies against the Americans, because they have no other choice but to do this, because their battle strategy has completely fallen apart based on Tenskwatawa and what he did all by himself. So, with this, as we move into the future, these issues are not going to go away. These issues with Native Americans and them being overpowered in practically every turn. And granted, they have some really good battle strategies, and they're working with the British, but at the same time, they never regain that power to ever be able to handle the forces of the Americans pushing their way westward again. And this is something that happens throughout history. It's just they keep getting pushed farther and farther and farther and farther west, and there's never again anyone who's able to bring them together. So we're going to go to the Chesapeake and Leopard affair. So I've kind of told you guys a little bit about what's going on with impressment. But there is one really particular event that happens off the coast of Norfolk, Virginia. And it's in June of 1807. And this is one of those things that spark the War of 1812. The War of 1812 is not actually started yet at this point. But British impressment of sailors is going on at this point. And they are mostly taking on British soldiers. They are impressing British soldiers who have ran away or abandoned their posts, those kinds of things. But there is some contention over whether or not the people involved in the Chesapeake and Leopard affair are actually, there's some debate on whether or not they're actually British citizens. But from the most reliable pieces of evidence I can find, they are actually deserters. But we'll kind of get to that in a minute. So you have Her Majesty's ship, the Leopard, which is a British ship. It's captained by Salisbury Price Humphreys. And he's taking on the USS Chesapeake, which is a frigate, which is a type of ship. It's a much smaller ship that is headed by Commodore James Barron. So when this starts out, it's a fairly amicable transaction. And so what happens is this fella named Lieutenant John Meade comes aboard the Chesapeake with a warrant for deserters. He's refused. And so what will happen is that the Leopard will open fire on the Chesapeake's bow, which is done with its cannons that are on the broadside. The Chesapeake gets off one shot. Or is only hit, by one shot. And in that shot, 3 people are killed. The deserters are from Her Majesty's Melampus and the HMS Halifax. And 2 of them are actually people of African descent. So we don't know if they're actually British citizens or not. Excuse me. I have to apologize to you guys. Luckily, we're almost finished with this, but the coughs, I have to apologize. I know that's probably not comfortable for you guys to listen to. But with the Chesapeake and Leopard affair, you'll start seeing Congress really start to debate whether or not they think we should enter into a war with the British. At this point, we are financially depleted. We are spread out. We have poor infrastructure. All of the things that make the British mightier than we are. It's really kind of playing against us. The only thing that's in our favor at this point is that the British are also in a war with France. So we kind of tend to try to buddy up with France. It never works out well in France's favor. I'm just going to say that. But we're trying to buddy up with France as much as possible. But in that time, we will attempt to kind of work something out for the beginning part of it with the British, but it doesn't last very long at all. Let's talk a little bit about Warhawks now. So now that we know kind of what components are leading up to the War of 1812, we can get into what actually happens with the War of 1812 and some of the main players who are in the War of 1812 and why they're important. So Warhawks, in particular, are those people who are part of Congress who want to go to war with the British. At this point, in the beginning of 1812, there are approximately 12 members of the 12th Congress who are led by Henry Clay of Kentucky and John Calhoun. And these, like I said, they're people who want to enter into the War of 1812. Henry Clay is known as the Great Compromiser, but at this point, he's not wanting to compromise anything. That kind of adaptation of his personality doesn't come on until much later. He was born in 1777, so he doesn't have that memory of a lot of the cruelties and things that the U.S. suffered during our war for independence. And so he's kind of got this idea of how it would be a good thing for the nation to go to war. And he lives until 1852. So as time goes on, he kind of moves away from these ideas of the glories of war and those kinds of things. But he grows up becoming a lawyer, a planter, and a statesman inside Kentucky. Excuse me, I'll be right back. Alright, sorry about that, guys. Went to get a cough drop, so hopefully there won't be any more coughing fits for the rest of this, because we really only have one more slide after this one. Yay. So let's get back to it.